Hello, and welcome to the 10th episode of our fortnightly podcast from the Marginlands. I'm Prem Panika.
And I'm Arti Kumar Rao. And this week, we're talking about something that's very close to our hearts: how to tell stories about the environment that go beyond headlines and hashtags.
The presentation.
Yes, we have something to show you, and let's get right into it. Can everybody see it? Can you see
Mhm.
it, Prem?
Yeah.
Excellent. Good. So we start with a clip. Let's just play it, and you'll see what we're going.
Arti, speaking of telling environmental stories, this clip, if I remember correctly, is from a video that you filmed over a decade ago in the deep Thar near Jaisalmer.
Yes, 12 years ago,
R-
2013.
right. What is the story?
So, what you just saw was a shepherd pulling up water from what is a Hadean well, which is a well that's 400 meters, 200 to 400 meters deep. Uh,
Mhm.
really, really deep well, hand dug, if you can believe that. So, a very dangerous process actually for the people who are digging it. But this deep well only exists in the deep Thar desert where this water has collected over centuries. And it's only used by shepherds who are walking their desert goats and when they reach the deep Thar. So they do not extract this water unless there are flocks around who need the water. It's used very sparingly because they recognize that this is a bank, like a water bank, something that they can use when they are in the deep desert. So it's something very precious because there is no other source of water in these places, and these are vast places, very very large spaces.
And they use camels to pull
Yes.
up the water.
So the way this thing is that well is 200 to 400 meters deep, and it has
Mhm.
this pulley and it has that large leather bag that you saw that comes up. But the pulley is tied to two camels who walk out 200 to 400 kilometers as they pull up the
Meters.
water from the thing. What's that? Sorry,
200.
meters. Meters, not kilometers. 200 to 400 meters. They walk out as the bag comes up, and when the bag is almost there, uh, up, the shepherd yells out in a sing-song voice for the guy who's walking with the two camels to release the rope. And when he releases the rope, the slack
Mhm.
in the rope allows him to tilt the bag over and take out the water, the leather bag which contains the water which has come up from the well, and then he calls out again, and then that rope comes rushing back, and he catches it before
It
before
disappeared.
it disappears into the well with the bag. So the bag has gone down again for another thing. Those two camels walk back, and then the whole process starts again. So it's
See,
slow. It's very slow, it's deliberate, and it's only used as much as needed.
hmm. See, this is what I love the most about your work on Marginlands. And actually, come to think of it, about the best of environmental stories. What I love is how stories nest inside one another, like Matryoshka dolls. So
Mm-hmm.
each layer, whether it's a river whose course has been interrupted, or a fisherwoman whose traditional means of livelihood is lost, or a policy decision that does not seem to match ground reality, each of these things reveals another deeper layer, and eventually you end up reaching that smallest and that most fragile piece, a truth that you can't ignore.
That's right. That's right. And that is the essence of because of the fact that environment is all around us. We are the environment.
Hmm.
It's not other than us. And so by its nature, there are stories within stories. There are stories around us. Every little thing is connected. And so it is uh, it's important therefore to tell those to tease those things apart, but also make sure that you go deeper and deeper and you don't stop at just what you see, you know. Because the first time you see something, it's probably not uh, the whole story, or even, it's just one tiny part of the story. And so it's important to like you said, just go deepen the story, and with repeated visits over time, over seasons.
Yeah, actually, that's one of the things that I've seen pretty much every interview that you've done with various news outlets and various magazines, etc. Even say book promo tours and things. And I remember this one line that uh, you've said more than once. You said to go back repeatedly to places, to observe them through seasons and over years, allows me to see connections and to stay grounded.
Mm.
Another repeat trope from your interviews is where you talk of slow violence.
Mhm.
Let's go a bit deeper into that. Why slow violence?
So, slow violence is a term that was coined by Rob Nixon, who is, I
Hmm.
think, currently at Princeton. I think he's a professor there. Um, and slow violence basically means, let me put it up on the screen here for those who are watching us. It is something that is accretive.
Hmm.
It is also something that is attritional. And it is a violence, quote unquote violence, that occurs very gradually, so imperceptibly. Sometimes uh, you can't tell that it's violence from day to day. You have to take a very long view of it. And it is necessary, and therefore there's a huge element of time involved in that kind of violence, where it
Hmm.
unfolds slowly. But more importantly, it could also unfold over space. So geographically, it can be very dispersed. Basically,
Hmm.
something happening in one place can over time affect something in a place that could be 400, 800 kilometers away. And
Right.
so it is necessary uh, to pay attention to both time and space, long time and dispersed space, uh, and it is not spectacular. This kind of
Mm.
violence is not blood, gore, bombs, explosions, killing. Killing is there, but it's almost like death by a thousand cuts. So it's
Right.
very imperceptible, but it keeps chipping away at the resilience of people and of the land. So that, and if you think about it now, now that you know what slow violence is, the term is, you realize that a lot of environmental issues and um, things that are happening to the land around us, landscape changes and so on, fit this bill. They
Mm.
fit the mold of slow violence. And if you want to tell environmental stories, you necessarily have to slow down, and you have to pay attention over time.
Right. So, uh, like we said in the beginning, this is our 10th episode, barring one episode which was headline driven. That is the one about the two maritime disasters that occurred off the coast of Kerala. All our other episodes have followed a pattern where we bring in somebody um, who is an expert in one or more aspects of the environment on climate change, etc., and we discuss these issues with them. While on that, one of the heartening things about recent times is our previous episode with Dr. Roxy Cole seems to have resonated with the audience. It's gone to the last I checked, it was over 9,000 views, which for an environmental podcast is, and for a fledgling environmental podcast is quite something. So in this episode, we are kind of slowing things down and we'll walk through how we, Aarti and I, either together or individually, craft these stories. We'll think of the process from that first flicker of curiosity to the maps that we pour over and the research that we do, the documents we study, the data we dig into, and finally the muddy boots, all of which brings us to the moment where all of this coalesces into that one sentence, that one thought that feels true.
Right. And we'll, in order to do this, we will break this up into two parts. One is how do you do research on
Mhm.
topics like this, and what would help us read a landscape and deeply. Landscape, there are a lot of things that are contained in silences as well. So how do you read it with all your senses and especially paying attention to what you may not be seeing, right?
Mhm.
And second, then once you have all of that and you have your research, how do you shape a story, right? Uh, these are complex issues, they're nuanced, there could be a lot of data. How do you take a person, put them into a landscape, make them feel? Because data does not do that. So, how do you make something immersive? How do you make somebody feel?
Mhm. So, for those listening, if you ever asked yourself, how do I turn what I saw on that walk or in that village that I visited or on that trip that I took into a story that matters? This episode is for you.
And we hope you get something out of it, right? So, let's jump into it.
Right. So, the first part of that, like Aarti pointed out just before we took that break, was how do stories come together? How do you do the field work? How do you do the research? And that is what we're looking at in this section. And before we get deeper into that, a slight caveat, we'll be using a lot of examples from the environmental reporting that Aarti has done so far from Marginlands, from the book Marginlands specifically, and there's a reason for that. It's not an I, me, myself episode featuring Aarti Kumar Rao so much as there's a practical reason for it. Uh, when we discuss methodology through our own work, we not only know what the outcome was, what story came out of it, we also know how we got there, the incremental steps that we took to get to that place. Whereas when we read somebody else's book, we have the finished product in front of us, but we don't know the steps that that reporter, that writer took in order to get the story. So to talk about reporting frameworks, etc., it helps to talk about something that you know. And that's the only reason we're using Marginlands. This is not a promo for the book, though we'd love it if you bought it and read it if you haven't already. But
No,
yeah,
yeah, this is just it's just a tool, please. We just use
exactly.
it as a tool.
Right. So moving on.
Okay, moving on.
So every story begins with a question. If it is a news story, it begins with the question, what happened? Why did it happen? But if it is an environmental story, the question more often than not, the fundamental question more often than not is why. Why, for instance, has this wetland lost 40% of its bird species since 2005, as opposed to something generic like how is climate change affecting the wetland? Uh, we discuss basically, and that why leads to further questions, right? Why did something happen? How did we get here? Who gained? Who lost? Whose narrative are we hearing? Remember that famous African proverb about the story of a hunt being different if it is told by the lion? Who's missing from this narrative? Who's missing from the table? All of these, and finally, why now? Why is something happening now? So, to illustrate that concept, Arti, when we did that episode with S. Vishwanath, one of the intriguing uh, side notes, anecdotes was that Vishwanath cued you in to what, to my mind, is still my favorite story among the stories that you've done, the story, the deep reporting into the Thar Desert. Uh, and I remember you start saying that it all started with a name and a phone number. Talk
Mm-hmm.
us through it. Talk us through how curiosity played a part in really coming up with that story.
So here's how it happened. I had decided that I wanted to tell stories slow.
Mhm.
And I had also decided that I wanted to tell stories about fresh water. And if you are in Bangalore and you want to tell stories about fresh water, the first person you reach out to is Vishwanath. And he didn't know me. I didn't know him at that time. I just requested him to meet me at a Starbucks, or not Starbucks, sorry, a cafe coffee day on Vittal Malya Circle, which used to be there for those who remember in 2012. And he very graciously came, spent 2 hours with me. And he was wondering when he left, apparently, what would come of it, if anything at all. Who was this girl who was just like, out of the blue trying to, asking these questions. But the question from in my mind was that I wanted to tell stories about one of the most pressing issues that I saw in our time, and that was how we treated our water. And he told me there was nothing better, no other place better to start at than the desert.
Mhm.
And I had found at that time I had found that suggestion extremely strange because I'm talking water here and he's talking desert. So I was like, okay, what fresh water am I going to find and how much? And so he said, all you need to do is talk to this one man. And he gave me a name and a phone number. That's all I had. I did call the man and he said, yes, when you come here, I will meet you. And when I did land there, which is another story in itself, how I got there, um, he did not answer his phone. And I was like, oh my gosh, I was standing at this very dusty tea stall in the remote Thar Desert, very close to the Pakistan border. But eventually he showed up. And I realized very quickly that this was not something that was going to be done anytime soon. And the
Mhm.
reason was when I reached the Thar Desert, it was summer
Mhm.
and there was not a drop of water in sight. And everything that this man I was meeting, Chatar Singh, told me uh, was about abundant water.
Mhm.
And so I was curious again. I was like, wait, how does this happen? We've all heard that the desert blooms when there's one rain, all of that, yes. But then how does this abundant water come about? And, you know, where does it go? I can't see any of it now. So how do people sustain themselves? So a lot of questions. So everything that Chatar Singh told me just threw up more questions than answers. And so it just kept getting deeper and deeper, the curiosity. And also, I had seen a lot of things and read a lot of things about the desert and how it was being used, what it was termed as, that is wasteland, etc. So then the question was that, wait, what's happening in the desert? Who's gaining? Who's losing? All of that. So it just kept leading one to another, one to another. But it started very simply with just a name and a number.
Yeah. And that is one of the, I remember actually. come to think of it, you have this serendipitous thing of reaching out to people and then ending up with 2 and 3 hour conversations. Because I remember we did the same thing, right?
Yeah,
Uh, this,
exactly.
this was, if I remember correctly, at the Leela's dining room, and we ended
Yes,
up, after everybody had left and the staff literally had to throw us out. Uh,
yes.
but that said, yeah. So that's how curiosity, and this curiosity led to what, 6 separate trips to the Tar across seasons, across a timeline.
12.
12.
12 trips, 8 in 1 year, and then 4 in the subsequent year, because the cycle went from kind of January, February to all the way through the next Feb. And then I went back after a few months to see, you know, the grain, etc. So yeah, it was I think about 11 or 12 trips to the Thar over a year and a half,
Mhm.
each time spending about 20 days, 2 weeks to 20 days there.
Right. Which, I mean, we keep talking about slow violence. We talked about it earlier. Slow violence is a bit like slow food, really. I mean, it's a story that is simmered and seasoned, and comes together over a long period of time. And the first thing that happens when you're in the field and the preliminary work is done is reading the landscape, which would be the for want of a better phrase, it would be the investigative pyramid, where what you are doing is observing broadly to start with, and then zooming into specifics, and then from the specifics widening again to systemic impacts, etc. Right?
Yeah,
So,
exactly. Hmm.
so you use layers of observation, for want of a better way of putting it. You use what is visible on the surface, the symptoms,
Hmm. Hmm.
what lies below the subsurface, which is the causes for what you're seeing on the surface, and
Hmm.
then you go deep into what is the systemic cause or causes for what is happening. Or if you put it in a timeline, what was here, what is here now, and what could possibly happen over the next, say, 15, 20 years, which
Correct.
is what you did with the Thar as well. And for those who haven't read that story, very broadly, it is the story of how desert tribes use ancient wisdom to 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 harvest water in such a way that the 8 millimeters or so of rain that they get in a year last them for 7 to 8 months for all their uses, broadly speaking, right?
Yeah, they get 100
Yeah,
millimeters,
100
10
millimeters. Yeah,
centimeters. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah.
right,
So exactly, and it tides them through a couple of years of no drought, of no rain, of drought, and and also most stunningly, it it fosters rain-fed agriculture in the desert.
right.
With just one rain, the whole 12 villages around a certain water harvesting structure can be fed. And that is again an ancient way of how they survived and even thrived in the desert, the people. And that has been resurrected. And so that's the stories of that, of how that happens. And it's till date, like for you, Prem, and I think because of who Chatar Singh is, it is for me the most illustrative in terms of slow journalism, how to read the landscape and um, how to understand a landscape, and how the people and creatures depend upon it and how they use it and how they
Hmm.
respect it. It was enlightening beyond anything that I could have imagined going in for the first time. But yes, so going back to your point, of observing broadly and what's on the surface versus what's deep and hidden, I think another story which again really opened my eyes to this was floods in Assam.
Hmm.
And how every year, right, we read about the floods in Assam and that the river has overflowed its banks and blah, 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 etc. There's an excellent essay here that I would love to kind of call out. Amitangshu Acharya wrote
Hmm.
Engineering the Floods. We will link to this in the show notes.
Yeah.
It was published, I think, in the Hindu or Hindustan Times. I forget now, one of these newspapers, quite a while ago. Think it was several years ago. But it is so well done and so pertinent. Amitangshu was a participant in our workshop, Out of Eden Walk storytelling workshop. And he's absolutely fantastic the way he tells stories because he does all of the above right here that you're looking at on the screen, right? He does it
Yeah.
really well. But here's what I'm just going to show you with a few photographs of just one instance of that thing where if you start from the bottom left corner, that is a flood which has devastated and washed away fields,
Hmm.
paddy fields. And so easy to say, oh yeah, it's just, or even blame it on climate change and say, oh, it's been, lot of rain and increased rain and the water, came and took away the thing. But there's so many things. So when you just look at that one photograph, this is why I say that sometimes photographers get it wrong. But they share these photographs and they say climate change and they say floods, etc.
Hmm.
But really, what's going on in that picture is an enormous amount of sand that has fallen on these, that has come and been dumped on these very rich paddy fields. And the that means the river has dumped it. It's not come from any magical place. But how did the river get to these paddy fields when it used to flow about a kilometer away? And the next picture is of kids that when the flood waters came, they were out of school and they were having a good time. They were swimming. But if you look at the mountains in the distance in that picture,
Hmm.
that's really where the story is. So this, where the floods have come through, are the symptom, only the symptom and the result. You dig deeper and you realize that in those mountains, and you head to the picture now to the right, and I'm going in anti-clockwise fashion, you have a whole amount of boulder mining going on.
Right.
And these boulders alter the pace of rivers and the course of rivers and what the river carries. Where the river used to carry fine silt, which used to um, fertilize and beautifully enrich the paddy fields downstream, now
Hmm.
it's carrying heavy sand, which is released by the. You can see the size of these boulders. Each of
Yeah.
these boulders are massive. The size of humans. You can see the humans there for scale. And if you move such boulders, it also displaces a whole amount of sand that the boulder was sitting on. So, and then what are these boulders being used for? You go back and you see the picture on the right top corner, and it's for roads. It's for road making. It's for dams. It's for all kinds of construction. Is why these boulders are being mined, and that very mountain that you see on the top right used to look like what it is on the top left.
Yeah.
And the reason you can tell that is if you keep going back to places. And I kept going back. These pictures have been taken 7 years apart. The first time I visited, it looked like what it looks like on the top left corner. And then when I went back, just when there was a break during two COVID phases, I saw what I saw on the top right corner. So and then you realize then that there's again, like we talked about slow violence, the
Hmm.
cause is disparate. It's far. It's not where the result is, right? And also the fact that it happens slowly. It's taken years for these things to happen, but when it changes quite drastically downstream. So so to go back to the previous slide, the whole point about
Yeah.
this on the surface, what is visible may not be your story,
Yeah.
and you need to keep digging deeper, follow it. And the best people to tell you this, who told me this, the farmers. The farmers told
Right.
me, when we were young, Our parents taught us to look at the mountains, and if it's raining in the mountains, we knew we had 6 hours before the waters came through. Now we have
Right.
one, right? This happened, this flooding, this particular flooding thing where I took that photo, it happened within an hour of the rains in the mountains. So it was that quick, right? And of course, there is another whole thing about embankments, which is another story. So there are several stories which will kind of spawn from one story, or sorry, or from one surface level uh,
Observation.
observation. Yeah.
Yeah. If you go back to those pictures, Arti, for a moment, the next slide. Uh, Arti did it in anti-clockwise order. But if you remember, one of the points that we made was uh, to look at a timeline. What was here? What is there now? What may happen in 20 years? Look at it clockwise and you see exactly that, right? I mean, the top left image is what used to exist. On the top right, it is what now exists, a mountain that has been uh, mined for rock, for what we call development, and therefore, reading from left to right on the bottom, you see the consequences. And this is what that kind of observation that we were talking about. And it also, like Aarti just pointed out, it maps to the point about you first observe the broad landscape, and then you zoom into the impacts, and then you widen the lens to take in the systematic or the systemic forces that actually brought about this result. Moving on from, so we talked about curiosity, we talked about asking the question why, we talked about reading the landscape, and not just superficially, but going deep into a landscape to see what is there, thinking along a timeline, etc. And now the next thing that we need to talk about is what within us we call the six source rule. Uh, the backbone of credibility always is the peer-reviewed science, not just any old paper that comes up, but what has been peer-reviewed, what has been proven as fact. Then you have government data, which you need anyway, because government data informs government policy, and you need to know when you're reporting about what happens in a landscape, you need to know what kind of data the government used in order to formulate the policy that led to whatever it is. But you also need independent data because government data is fungible and it's not always, how do I put it? It's not the ultimate source of truth in most instances. The most important thing, though, and Aarti, you need to speak more to this at some point because uh, this is probably the backbone of all the reporting that you've done, is a community's lived experience. You just made the point about farmers telling you why the Assam floods, or how the Assam floods had changed from getting advance warning of about 6 hours to now having literally no warning. You need to look at what the industry is saying. I mean, and a lot of this development is based on industry. You need to understand their perspective as well. And then you have historical archives to provide context and backstory. I mean, Aarti, again, I can think of two examples where historical archives produced the underpinning of some great stories you've done. One is Bangalore's lakes,
Mm.
and the story that you had dug up about how these lakes originated with from the time of Devegowda, of Kempe Gowda, I beg your pardon,
Yeah,
what's
big
wrong
one.
with me? Yeah. Uh,
Yeah,
from the time of Kempe Gowda. The other one is because we talked about the Assam floods, the Faraka Dam,
right.
which again you had to dig into archives to figure out why something was happening.
Correct.
And and again, the last point in this six source rule is personal long-term observation, which you already talked about in context of the Tar. Uh,
Yeah.
Specifically here, all the rest of it is fairly obvious. So the science, you know where to get it, and you know how to read it, what to take out of it, and how to make sure that it is peer reviewed and therefore credible. You know where to find government data. You know to look for people who are working on the ground in order to get independent data, all of these things. The lived experience of the community, that has formed a major part of your reporting, or at least that has underpinned a major part of your reporting across uh, all these years that I've known you. Talk a little bit more about that.
You know, that goes back to the slide where we talked about who's at the table.
Mm,
And oftentimes, the people who are most affected, who are on the land, who depend upon the land, who live in these landscapes, are not at the table. They're
right.
not even part of the decision making. They're not there. The way they use the land is discounted, is not really taken into consideration when land use change is decided, etc. And a very conscious decision in margin lands that I made, which was to simply listen to these people and
Mhm,
see what they had to say, and report that, literally report that without any editorial,
mm,
because I felt the need to, because I felt that what I was reading and seeing before I went to places was very different from when I did go to those places and I saw what I saw. For example, the Assam floods also, but also, where this picture was taken. It's in Bangladesh. Uh,
mhm,
it's it's very close to where the Tista enters Bangladesh, and there is a lot of stuff happening, and this is not particular to Bangladesh. It's particular to anybody living downstream of a dam, and
mhm.
how their lived experience is completely discounted. It's just not even. It's disregarded. It's not even important almost. And
Right.
like you mentioned, Faraka. Similarly, in Faraka, um, what the communities are going through upstream and downstream, but not just that, how it's affecting communities 400 kilometers downstream, 800 kilometers upstream, is stunning.
Mm,
And those communities will very clearly, they know where the cause and effect and what is happening and how their lives have changed sits. I mean, you don't really even realize. We talk about Bihar and we talk about rampant unemployment in Bihar and so on. Eastern Bihar used to be a thriving fishing community,
right.
huge. 400 boats go out from every village, into the lovely Ganga, which used to be a thriving fishery. What's there now? Nothing,
Yeah.
right? And so the, it really changes your way. And people usually say, oh, yeah, there's nothing in Bihar, and that's why people move for economic reasons. Uh, Truly, you need to follow that back. Really, what has happened? What changed? Why are people not being able to make ends meet in a place which is by the Ganga, which is could have been a really productive ecosystem, and it was, right? So, going and spending time in communities and just listening to them is something that I have found has hugely informed reading a landscape also, you know, and oftentimes that doesn't happen in a single visit. They're
Right.
not going to open up to you, or they're going to tell you what they think you want to hear, because that is how human nature is. But if you keep going back and you go back in seasons, you see how it affects people. Like in Faraka, I've gone in winter, I've gone in summer, I've gone in the rains, during the rains when everything is flooded. I've gone after the rains when things are uh, not yet cleared up. It's still there is still water, but it's not completely clean. And then again in the dry season, and you see a completely different rhythm. You see how the jute farmers interact with the river. You see how the people who have been displaced interact with the river. Various things. And so on ground long term observation in communities, in landscapes, is invaluable for telling environmental stories. And environmental stories is, I hate qualifying it as environmental stories. It's really human stories of our,
Stories. Yeah.
yeah.
And by the way, uh, you were talking free form, and I was waiting for that question, and you asked that question instinctively. The first thing we said when we talked about how environmental stories come up, step one, curiosity, ask why. And you made that point. Why is Bihar so poor? Why is there so little employment when it's right on the banks of the Ganga with all the opportunities that it affords, fishing, agriculture, etc., etc. So yeah, curiosity as step one. Step two, reading the landscape. Step three, the sources. The six source rule, looking at all the sources, etc. One caveat over here, uh, for people listening to this, by this point, you're like, okay, Aarti goes 12 times to the desert to do one story, or 8 times to Assam to understand flooding in that place. I'm not going to be able to do all this. Therefore, I can't tell environmental stories. Not true. And we'll get to why it's not true later uh, in the program. But for now, let's move to step four, which is what do you do when you're out in the field? Uh, so some of this we've already talked about. Collect local voices, uh, talk to locals. And Aarti made the point about initially they're going to tell you what they want you to hear. And that is true. The first time around, people are like, huh, okay, reporters come. And so they give you the sound bites that they think you want. But if you just sit there, if you just let them talk, if you show patience, and if you make repeated visits, they begin to see you as not just an extractive reporter, but as someone who is genuinely interested in what they're going through. And that is when they start opening up. So, one of the reasons why, for instance, Aarti keeps talking about going back time and time again, I've had the same experience. The first time, I never get anything that I can use. I listen, I make notes. That's just more to give them the sense that I am listening, I am involved. But it's a second, the third, the fourth trip where people actually start treating you as belonging to them and start opening up, right? The trust comes with repeat visits. So it's
Yeah,
not
because
just
they never believe that you'll come back. When you tell them you'll be back,
exactly
they're like, yeah, you're not going to come back. But when you
right.
do go back, then they know you're vested in their lives and not just as a story. And
And
that is,
both of us, yeah, and both of us have had these calls, right? When are you coming back?
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
they get used to it, and then they want to see you over and over again. They want to talk to you, etc., etc. So in the field, practical. So what you see in the list on screen: collecting local voices, collecting soundscapes, uh, mining indigenous knowledge, because as Arti pointed out earlier, the locals know, they live these places. So they know what has changed, they know when it has changed, they know why it has changed. And they know this in a way that your scientific reviews and peer reviewed journals, etc., are not going to tell you. So collecting indigenous knowledge, very important. Maps, and not just maps of the current situation, maps over time. We've used these kind of maps early in earlier episodes, but very important to go back in time and see what was there and then compare it with what is there right now. Uh, yeah, site visits, which is going back to the ground, right? To capture the smells, the sounds, the textures. Keep what we call a dual entry journal. See, when you're in the field, you see a lot of things. And the things that you're seeing also lead to certain thoughts, certain emotions, etc. Imagine a 20-day field trip. By the end of it, and I remember when going with Aarti into the field, one of the things that she does after about 2, 3 days, where we wake up and hit the field at about 5 o'clock in the morning and come back at 8:30, 9 o'clock at night, or sometimes later. 3 days, and then suddenly she throws up her hands and says, okay, I need a break. And all she'll do is sit in her room and keep making notes. Because otherwise, you have sensory overload, you miss a lot of things. So, what you do is in your journal, make notes of what you saw, what you heard, what you felt, etc., in the moment to the extent possible. It doesn't mean as you're seeing it, you're making notes, but immediately thereafter, when everything is fresh. Uh, we call it a reporter's diary, really. where we're just collecting impressions. It's not forming a story yet, but it is very, very important to do that, particularly if, you know, in order to avoid the sensory overload that I was talking about. I remember you saying that every landscape has its own sound signature, uh, all of that, right? You want to do some show and tell?
Yes, yes, I will. One thing I wanted to just add before we go to that is an example of what indigenous knowledge means, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, in the Thar, for example, so often you hear people saying, "Oh, this land is overgrazed," or
Mm.
the, there's a threat of overgrazing, etc. Because these people walk with huge flocks, 400
Right.
goat, sheep, etc. But if you ask the indigenous people, it's very interesting. They, when they walk, they dig, or they use hand dug shallow wells for water until they reach the deep desert. Then they use the well which I showed you in
Mm-hmm.
the very first slide. But these shallow wells are percolation wells, and they take X amount of time to refill themselves once they have been pulled up.
Right.
Okay, so a flock comes through a space, uses the well,
Mm-hmm.
right? It cannot stay in that space because there's no more water once the water has gone and the well is replenishing. So they move on.
Mm-hmm.
Now that has the has another purpose, because now if they are moving on, they're also not grazing in the same space
Right.
over time. If they were, there would have been a chance for it to be overgrazed. But by the nature, by the rhythm of the well, they have to move on.
Mm.
And they go on, they walk further, grazing, grazing, grazing as they go. And then in the a little bit off is another well, which will be giving at that time. And they extract from there and they drink and then they move on and so on. That is indigenous knowledge of how much time water takes, the well takes to replenish itself, how you don't want to overgraze because it's in your own interest not to have overgrazed lands. But equally, what is happening now is that the government is digging bore wells.
Mm.
When that happens, the water never runs, like it's keeping on coming, which means flocks can stay put, people can
Right.
put down roots. That's when you have the
Overgrazed.
overgrazing. You could have overgrazing, right? So listening to the indigenous knowledge is usually rhythmic. It's seasonal. It lives with the land. It breathes with the land. It goes up and down with the rhythms of the land, and that's a beautiful, important thing which we lose, and that is resilience, which then again gets lost. So those are things that we can pick up when we talk to the locals who have been living close to the land and who know. It's not that everybody does. So I want to caution that this is not some kind of romantic thing, because I
Mm.
met a lot of shepherds also who liked the fact that they didn't have to travel distances and the borewells have come. But of course, those weren't the people who understood the land clearly, right?
Right.
I met a lot of people who said, no, 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 that guy doesn't understand the land, and this is how it works. And it's far more sustainable when you listen to that old knowledge, the old way of doing things. All
Yeah.
right. So going to this, right. Uh, I put, what I had done maybe about a year ago was I used to read from 1 minute things from Marginlands and then pair it up with what I had seen on ground
Mm-hmm.
which informed that research for that thing.
Hi,
So I'm just going
folks.
to
For
play
today's reading of
this.
Marginlands, I take you to Arunachal Pradesh. So here's part 3. The Yamne is a Siang tributary flowing through richly biodiverse terrain that plays host to various Adi clans. Old-growth, impregnable forests crowd the stacked mountain ranges. Panikheti terraces, which divert small mountain streams into fields for growing rice, spread out near the valley floor. Contrasting with this is the rain-fed Jhum Kheti. Life here seems untouched by the passage of centuries. I feel as if I have dropped down a rabbit hole into an earlier elemental age. Children tumble down mud slopes on sleds made of bamboo with little round wooden wheels. People forage for mushrooms in the forests above the villages. A day later, Katon and I make the trip up to Lower Pemmican and the confluence of the Siang and Yangsangchu. It takes us half a day by car. As we near Lower Pemmican, it's not merely the landscape that changes, but life itself. Save for a few far-flung hamlets and gompas, Lower Pemmican is all jungle and high peaks of snow.
So that was 1 minute of reading. But I just wanted to say that all of that footage did not happen in one trip.
Yeah.
You saw footage there from 2016, 2021. I mean, over time, I kept going back to these places. And of course, I went deeper in 2021. But Siang, the valley, I've been going since 2014. So
Yeah.
I've collected stuff over time. And then that kind of, it's interesting how something you collected or you saw maybe 6 7 years ago will make sense to you only in 2021. When you go back and you're like, oh my god, I've seen this. I've seen this happen in a different time.
Right. Yeah.
It's fantastic. It's like collecting string.
I remember the 2021 trip. Actually, I remember the 2014 trip as well, but I remember the 2021 trip because it was between those two episodes of COVID.
Correct. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was doing a story for Emergence magazine.
Right.
Yeah. This one.
Hi, Instafam. Continuing reading 1-minute excerpts of Marginlands. Here's part 2. Today, I'm on the Bias River. Judging by how far Amarjeet has to push his oar to hit bottom, we are now in water that is a few meters deep, dolphin territory. It's not easy to spot river dolphins. Unlike their photogenic marine cousins, they do not jump and spin and frolic. I count down 90 seconds, the average time a river dolphin, a mammal that has to surface for air, stays underwater before coming up for breath. 3, 2, 1... And on cue, not 20 yards away, a curved grey-brown snout breaks the surface, pointing at the sky, teeth gleaming white through its trademark smile. There are no other boats around, no gawking tourists, no cannonades of clicking cameras. Just us and two of South Asia's rarest river dolphins, dipping and diving with abandon. The experience is addictive. I return the next day and the day after that, and my luck holds. At some points, the mother and calf show up. At other times, a lone male. At times, I'm on a boat. At others, I trail my leg over the edge of the riverbank and watch these Indus dolphins.
This
If
one
I,
was pure serendipity.
yeah, if I remember correctly, you and Paul were walking. You reached that Ramasar site just inside
Yeah.
uh,
Harike
in
wetland. Yeah.
the Harike. Yeah, and Paul was unwell, so
Yes.
you decided to take that time to go chasing dolphins.
I took a walk. I didn't know I was chasing dolphins. I took a walk. I had read on Wikipedia that Indus dolphins were spotted here in 2007, and this was 2018 when we were walking. So I didn't expect them to be there. Um, and it's stunning because you reach the the edge of the river, the Bias, and you can see them from the riverbank,
Hmm.
which is, I mean, I didn't expect that at all. Of course, the first day I went, I just kind of asked the boatman, and I was on his boat, and I saw it from there. But um, I guess the thing to take away from here is that you stay alive to situations. So while you're parked in a place, and maybe you think there's nothing to do or whatever, you never know what you're going to find. So even in those spaces, you go, you explore, um, let's go back here. Let's see what it, it's basically collecting local soundscapes, visuals, etc. And sometimes a story comes out of that,
Yeah.
right? Like this, I had never thought in my life that I'd see Indus dolphins in India. And here they were. But then that itself is a story, because from those few that we saw then, which was 2018, there were 11 in the census. It's come down to 5, 3, 2, and now maybe even those two are gone. We may have
Right.
just lost the species in India completely,
And
which
there's
is
a story
sad.
there which we will at some point actually dive deeper into. But again, where did we start this entire deep dive into how environmental stories come together with that one word, curiosity, which is
Mhm.
what you're talking
Hi,
about.
folks.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Then we move on to step five, which is basically it's you're flooded with information and everything excites you, you take it all down, but it needs that pause. It needs you to step back and double check everything that you've got. Uh, Conflicting narratives are, Aarti, for instance, talked about discussing things with the people who live in these landscapes. One of the things that you will find when you go into the field is two people living in the same landscape could actually see things differently, uh, which is what we call conflicting narratives. And you need to collect them and then you need to test them against what is actually happening on the ground to see where each of these people is coming from. And the fact that there are two conflicting narratives does not mean that one is true and one is false. It means it's derived from lived experience. So the first person experiences it one way. For example, Arti just made the point about nomads in the desert who know how to make sure that the land is not overgrazed, how water is not overused, etc., versus other nomads in that exact same space who see borewells as God's gift. I don't have to trek through this through the burning sands in this heat. I can stay put someplace. So both narratives have a measure of truth in them, and it's up to us to collect them all and then see where the sense is. It's equally important to not be exploitative, uh, because none of these are our stories to tell. These are stories of the land, these are stories of the people who live on the land. And appropriating those stories for the sake of a byline is bad ethics. You really need to be clear why you're doing these stories, what the purpose is. We talked about point number three earlier as well. You have to return to your sources. You have to keep in touch with people. Um, People are very quick to spot whether you're reaching out to them because you want something versus you're reaching out to them periodically just to say hello. And it helps immensely. I mean, Aarti does it all the time. I do it my way. People we've met, for instance, Aarti and I walked along the Kerala coastline in 2019. But a few episodes ago, when we had to do that uh, piece on where we did that podcast on what is happening off the coast of Kerala, some of the sources that we had then came in use. We could actually just call them and they knew us, they knew what kind of reporters we were, and they spoke to us. They told us how they were seeing the thing, right? So that cultivating trust is one of the most essential parts of being a journalist or being a storyteller, and not being exploitative of the people whose trust you cultivate. All of this sounds like preaching from the high moral ground, but it's actually practical politics when you are in the storytelling business. Uh, we talked about maintaining a research log, we talked about building a local expert network. So, all of these fall in step five of how we uh, bring a story together. And then there is one final step, which I mean, both for Aarti and for me, is the most important part of the process of telling a story, and that is what we call the one liner or the through line. Uh, so, what this is what happens when we go into the field is we see a whole lot of things. So, for example, if you look at all the stories that Aarti has just told you about the Thar, there is a lovely little story about the extraction of water from those deep hand dug wells. There are stories about how the nomads, the pastoralists, operate in the desert, how they make sure that they never run out of water and out of grazing land, etc., etc. And beyond a point, you're like, okay, fine, I have this story, I have that. And Arti, from your reporting trip in the Thar, I also remember stories about the Manganiyars and how they are it goes back to the ancient practice of singing history and how the Manganiyars do it. That was a part of the thing. The question then becomes, finally, you have notebooks filled with observation, with all these stories that you've collected, and you're suddenly like, okay, what is my story? And that is where the one sentence through line helps. Because before you start work on the story, write one clear line about what your story is. Because that will serve as your North Star. It'll guide you. It'll also tell you what you need to leave in, what you need to take out, what may be a related story that you could box or tell at a different time in a different context. So there are examples on the screen. Environmental issues, environmental reporting is complex, and to avoid getting lost in the weeds, this is probably the single most important step that bridges two aspects of environmental reporting. The first is the field work, the research, etc. The second is the actual telling of the story. In between that comes the one-liner, comes the through line. Because now I've got a lot of information. I want to be clear what story I'm going to tell. Aarti?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to say that I am very bad at this. Prem keeps telling me to do it, and I don't know whether I do it and don't look at it and don't keep it top of mind, and then I kind of go off in various different directions. But he keeps bringing me back to the one line, and that helps. Uh, So it's very, if you're lucky enough to have someone like Prem who's, guiding you, that's great. Otherwise, just force yourself. This really helps. This one liner really helps keep you grounded and keep you focused. It's really, really important. But I want to go back to something that we talked about here,
Mhm.
conflicting narratives. Um, it's very interesting. Even Prem just mentioned that two people using the same landscape could see things very differently. I want to read a small passage from an essay by Barry Lopez, which makes this point with respect to indigenous communities. Um, Okay, so here it is. I would like to make a final point. He's talking about his travels in Alaska, in this place called the Anaktuvik Pass, which is in the Brooks Range, I think, in Alaska. Um, and it's funny because I've just
Yes.
come in from Alaska, and I know how breathtakingly beautiful some of those regions are. I didn't go to Anaktuvik Pass, but around there. I would like to make a final point about the Wolverine stories I heard at Anaktuvuk Pass. I wrote down the details afterward, concentrating especially on the aspects of biology and ecology of the animals. I sent the information on to my friend living with the Cree. Cree is a tribe. When many months later I saw him, I asked whether the Cree had enjoyed these insights of the Nunamut into the nature of the wolverine. Nunamut is another tribe. What had they said? You know, he told me how they are. They said, that could happen. In these uncomplicated words, the Cree had declared their own knowledge of the wolverine. They acknowledged that although they themselves had never seen the things that the Nunamut spoke of, they accepted them as accurate observations because they did not consider story a context for misinterpretation. They
Mhm.
also preserved their own dignity by not overstating their confidence in the Nunamut, a distant and unknown people. Whenever I think of this courtesy on the part of the Cree, I think of the dignity that is ours when we cease to demand the truth and realize that the best we can have of those substantial truths that guide our lives is metaphorical, a story. And the most of it we are likely to discern comes only when we accord one another the respect that Cree showed the Nunamut. And the reason I bring this up is because all too often you'll find either officialdom or even researchers full of hubris and discounting things that are not in published papers. So just keep an open mind when it comes to that, because some things, I would say, we don't know everything, right? Science does not know everything yet. And these people live in these landscapes day in and day out, and they have lived knowledge over years, centuries, hand me down stories, etc. There's probably something in there, a kernel of truth. And so keep your minds open when it's, at least it's really helped me keep my mind open. And I keep remembering this thing that I read in Barry Lopez's essay, and I read this in 2013, and it's just stayed with me.
Right. So,
Yeah, sorry, we're here now.
right. So at this point,
Line, and now we have
how to craft a story. So basically, at this point, we've talked you through how fieldwork happens. You've stood ankle deep in salt water, you've listened to the elders, you've double checked the rainfall data, you've asked yourself the hardest question: is the story really mine to tell? Now comes the second half of the work, and that is, for a lot of people, it's the harder half, because research is what happens, the story is what you make of it. So now we shift gears and we talk about how we braid these threads into narrative. How do we write it in a way that makes people feel the change, not just read about it? So, moving from the research, the field work, the one liner, etc., and then getting down to actually crafting compelling stories. Uh, Again, I mean, this is a point that you made earlier when we were talking offline yesterday. I think it was, Arti, that this is not so much about reporting as it is about storytelling, right?
Mhm.
Uh, do you want to differentiate between the two
Um,
from your point of
yeah,
view?
so I'll differentiate it. I don't know whether this is going to be valid for everybody, but this is how I differentiate.
Mhm.
Um, so reporting can be done even from my desk.
Hmm.
I can call people up for quotes. I can call people up for information. I can do secondary research on data, put it all together, and report on a story.
Yeah.
However, it doesn't make me feel
Hmm.
necessarily. It might be informative, but it doesn't make me feel. That thing that you tell me, Prem, the very first day I think I met you in 2012, you spoke to me about this DC Comics uh,
Guide to writing
guide
comics,
to
yes.
writing. So, by the way, upstairs, I have bought that DC Comics
Hmm.
book in which the guide is in the first 3 pages. Actually, I'm,
Yeah.
I'm going to bring that this time back to India. And by the way, I'm not in India right now as we record this. But anyway, so that, right, the make me feel, put me in their shoes, and bring to life what they are feeling, what the demons are, what their aspirations are, what their fears are. Bring it to life. Make me feel, because that's what will stay with you. The fact that 100,000 cubic feet of water was let go, and it drowned a village, versus how those people actually were running for their lives, or how so many people got buried, for example, in Ladakh in 2005 in a flood, buried doing exactly what they were doing at the time. So there's people who are kind of frozen under sludge, um, in the process of doing things. So I mean, it's a completely different feel. It's what makes people sit up, take notice, and it's probably what stays with people, a story
Yeah.
versus a report, which informs, but it doesn't personalize.
We talked about the importance of writing a through line or a one liner, right? So imagine that you've done that. Imagine that you've got a line that tells you what the story is that you're going to do. From there, what you're having to do next is find the narrative thread. It means, where do you begin? Where do you end? And a good way of doing this is first think of the ending. Think of where you want to end the story, because that is what the reader finally takes away. And that ending will tell you where you want to begin the story. Because ideally, you like the beginning and the end to talk to one another. Uh, Stories generally emerge from conflict, from character, from discovery. So, one of the things that you need to do is look for the human moment or even the non human protagonist, which could be a river, it could be a fish species, it could be the coastline, whatever it is. You're looking for what personalizes the issue. It could be lack of water in the Thar and how tribes are working to remedy that. It could be erosion along the coastline and therefore what is happening to uh, both the coast and to the people who depend on the coast, etc. So look for that protagonist, and the protagonist is not necessarily always a human being. Arti, you have some examples to show, right?
It's not, yeah, it's probably just a rudimentary example, but it's again going back to that one thing that 1 minute that I used to read
Mm-hmm.
from the book. And I really felt that in the story, which was called Hunting with Dolphins,
Mm.
the human was not the protagonist at all.
Yes.
It was very much the river and the dolphin itself.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm presenting here is it's just an example of the experience of being on that river on a dark, absolutely dark night, and then suddenly seeing those dolphins come up to fish with these fishermen. So I'll just play that 1 minute clip, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Hi, folks. Reading Marginlands Part 4. We go hunting with dolphins in the Brahmaputra. We're inching up the Brahmaputra with two fishermen, Lekhu and Ranjan, who are among the last of their tribe in Assam, handheld harpoon fishermen who fish with dolphins. We're camped on a sapori and awaiting nightfall. Come 9 p.m., the men fill up a kettle-shaped lamp with kerosene and poke a wick into its spout. And now we set off. Lekhu's eyes are fixed on that arc of light as he uses his harpoon to call the dolphins. He teases the water, moving the tip of the instrument in wide curves along the surface. As time passes, out of the pitch black of the night, there is a whoosh off to our right. The flashlight beam lights up the dorsal fin of a gangetic dolphin. First one, and then another. I switch off my light and listen to the swoosh of their breath through the blowholes. They stay with us. Lekhu is now alert for signs of fish fleeing ahead of the dolphins.
So that was the
Yeah.
experience itself.
And
Yeah.
yeah, no, I mean, obviously, I remember reading this segment, Hunting with the Dolphins, in Marginlands. But watching this clip, I was thinking, no matter how good you are at describing something, seeing it is a completely different, completely, eye-opening experience.
Mm.
The tip of the harpoon through the water, the sudden swoosh of the dolphin, all of that, you can describe it, but imagine showing it. And that brings up a related point. I know that this is one of your pet peeves every time you put up a photograph or a video, and then you have a lot of questions on, okay, what camera did you use? Which lens was it? What was your setting? And I remember, actually, I remember getting yelled at by you because once I asked that question, and this was in the early days before I had gotten to know
Hopefully, I
you.
didn't yell at you, but
Yeah,
yeah.
you actually did. Um, but yeah, so the reason why I bring that up is you don't need all of that. You have the only device you ever need to record sound, to record video, to record visuals. It's right there in your hand, your cell phone, your smartphone. So don't let that discourage you from telling stories. Don't let that discourage you from recording the things that you see and hear. All of that. Yeah.
No, I totally agree. And in fact, this picture that's at the on the background of the slide
Hmm.
is a phone picture, but it made the cover of a book.
Yes. Yeah.
And in fact, oddly, all the photos bar one that have made covers of books, other people's books. My
Mm.
photos that have made the covers of other people's books, bar one. I think I have about 8 or 9 at this point, except for one. All of them were phone photos, but guess what? They were taken with the iPhone 4S. I don't know if anybody
Yeah.
remembers. It was precisely like this small, tiny little thing. But oh my God, as somebody said, I forget who said this, the best equipment is the one closest at hand. So
Yeah.
don't let anybody tell you that you need fancy equipment. You really don't. And these days, this thing is getting so much better
Yeah.
by the
Exactly.
days. So you have a lot of power in your hands for that.
And if I remember this picture, or was it another picture? It made the cover of Amitav Ghosh's book, right?
That's another picture.
Yeah.
Yes, that is also iPhone 4S.
iPhone. Yeah. So
Yeah.
moving on, when you're thinking of how to write the story, think of how stories nest one within the other. We talked about this earlier in this podcast. You start with an individual, you zoom out to the community, and you widen it still further to the global level or to the wider landscape. And again, remember the point we were making earlier about why we're using so many examples from Marginlands? It's because between Arti and I, we know how these stories came about. We don't just know what the stories are, we know the process that went into the story. Uh, the Thar would be a good example of that, right, Arti? Where you start with Chatur Singh and
Yes.
then look at the.
Um, yeah. So Chatar Singh started this resurrection of, the ancient method of rainwater harvesting with in one field, and then slowly seeing the prosperity come to that one field. The whole community wanted in on it, and so they started
Mm,
doing things on themselves by themselves. Seeing that whole community prosper, other communities across the whole district of Jaisalmer and Barmer wanted in on it. And so it was like a movement, it grew. And then, it's stunning because you see these small pockets where the movement is growing, but it is set in the desert, in the Thar Desert, which is designated as a wasteland by the Indian government. And so you have mining, and you have all kinds of the canal, you have all kinds of things coming into the desert, which is squeezing these people. So imagine these pockets of absolutely sustainable, beautiful, wonderful, ecologically sound practices set in a more global, but whatever. It's a wider milieu of pressure, of undermining the resilience and stuff like that. So it's a battle that they're fighting every day. So that kind of zooms out, to give you the 30,000-foot picture.
right. And then uh, in the previous episode with Dr. Roxy Cole, one of the points that he made was we were talking about carbon capture, and Roxy was making the point that carbon that was emitted during the Industrial Revolution still hangs around. These
Mm,
things don't go away, right?
mm, mm.
We need, when we are doing that was specifically about carbon capture, but it occurs to me, and you know this even better than I do, that the environment is not just something that you see today. That
Mhm,
environment has a past, it has a present, it has a future, and each informs the other. The past
mhm,
informs the present resonates with the past. What you're seeing in the present is due to things that happened in the past, and all of this is going to impact on the future. And by future, you're talking of a year or two, you're talking of a decade or two, and you're talking of centuries, right? So think time when you're framing your story, think of all of these three touch points: the past, the present, and the future.
Yeah, and there's one more thing that I would say,
Mhm.
and again, I learned this while I was working on the stories which eventually became Marginlands. It was not Marginlands earlier; it was River Diaries, which we were working on. And when it comes to the past, and you're doing research, say about what might have led to where you are at right now, it could so happen that you're reading tons of papers or you're doing a lot of secondary research, and it may never make it into your story.
Mm.
It could, or it could be one line in the story. So you're reading. I remember one story for which I read, I think it was 7 books,
Oh,
and eventually there was one line. Right? Remember the Kintup story when I was
yeah,
doing the
yeah,
Kintup story? Um, it's crazy, and you have to kind of put in those kinds of cycles to understand how you got to this present situation, or what made a certain how did a person how did you, like, for example, the story that I was talking about, how did they come to know that the Yarlung Sangpo and the Siang were the same river, right? That story, to tell that story, I had to read. I read 7 books, and some of it just informed me about what, okay, this is what happened. It never made it into the story. There was one sentence that I used where I kind of condensed all that I read, or I quoted one person. Um, it's that kind of crazy research that goes in, but it really then helps you tell the story of the present um, much better.
right. And again, this could all sound very daunting. Imagine reading 7 books, to not even mention one of them. But again, we'll talk about how you can do environmental storytelling towards the end of this episode. But one of the things to keep in mind is you can start small. You can start by telling local stories and then gradually start, getting deeper and deeper into environmental stories. The other thing is in that section, which on screen you will see as advanced writing techniques, it talks about immersive scene setting. Environmental stories need to bring environments to life. You can't have flat descriptions that don't evoke what it is like to be in that place. Remember the line from DC Comics Guide: take me to places I've never been and show me what it's like to live there. How do you do that? It is by collecting sensory detail, and that is the sounds, the smells, the tactile feel of things. And what good environmental reporters do is, even if they're not going to use this footage or these images, when you're in a place, you keep taking pictures, and these pictures record what you're seeing and serve like mental notes. You can go back to that, and you can feel what it was like, for instance, in that clip that Aarti just showed you, what it was like to go down that boat, to go
Hi,
in that
folks.
boat, or
Reading Marginlands.
yeah,
Sorry.
that one,
Yeah.
or this. All of this recorded during Aarti's multiple trips to Ladakh, and if you think of the way that flowed, uh, it brings that place to life. And also when she has to write about it, it works like an aid memoir. It helps you recreate what you saw, what you heard, what you sensed. Um, you'll see pretty much everything there, right? How the people lived. You'll see a lady preparing food. You will see the Pashmina goats and the goat herders. You see a metal worker. You hear the sounds of the river. Uh, this is what environmental reporters do. They capture the environment, they bring it back, they relive it, and then they write it. Uh, Writing data is one of the hardest parts because data makes your eyes glaze over. So find comparisons. Uh, don't just say X kilometers. What does X kilometers mean? What does it compare with? There is a beautiful site called the Measure of Things. You can put in some sort of measurement in there, so many liters of water or so many kilometers of land or whatever, and it'll tell you, for example, this is the size of Bangalore, and it makes it come alive, right? Uh, the third item, adopt slow journalism. We talked about this. Some of these things happen over a long period of time, like, for instance, coastal erosion. In 2019, Aarti and I went along the coast of Kerala, actually started in Kanyakumari and went a little beyond Trivandrum, uh, which pretty much is ground zero for erosion as far as the Indian coastline is concerned. Uh, Ati, when we were looking at that coastline, and we did it all right, we walked along the coast, we talked to the people who were affected, we went in a boat to see what it looked like from the sea in. But you also were looking at maps, as I recall,
Mm.
right?
Yeah, I was
And
curious. I was curious because there was, I mean, this is some, it was so stunning. The erosion was so stunning that I really wanted to see how over time it had really come to be. And you can see this? It is
yeah,
flipped, right? Yeah, okay.
Hi, folks.
Hang on a second.
Reading
I can flip.
Marginlands
oh
Part
no,
4.
1 second. Ah, just a second.
Hi, folks.
Stop.
Reading Marginlands.
yeah,
Wait, that one's playing.
okay,
Here we go. That's how the coastline has changed.
yeah,
You see where the red line was where the houses were,
mm,
where it started, and now the houses fell in the water.
yeah,
So there's so and on the ground, then you know. So you kind of, it's interesting. You see this in Google Maps, but now you know what it looked like on the ground. We
yeah,
talked to people who said their houses were 5 rows ahead of where they are right now, and they've been pushed back, pushed back, pushed back, or their houses have fallen in, and now they're where they are. And it shows in the map. You can see it very clearly using the Google Earth Pro's history
mm,
feature. You can
yeah,
see what has happened over time. And this is from 2002 to 2019.
right. 2019 was when we went there, and one of the
Correct.
memories that I have from that trip, which speaks to what Aarti was just talking about, is we were standing there, we were talking to two ladies whose home had been decimated by the waves. And they were the ones who were telling us that they were actually 5 rows back, and that the homes in front of them, 4 rows of homes, had all been captured, taken away by the sea, and now they were in the front lines. They were losing their home, a room at a time. And another a man came walking by. He saw us standing there talking to these women. He stopped, he joined the conversation, and at some point I remember Aarti asking, Aarti or I forget who asked him, so where do you live, where was your home? And he pointed into the sea and said, yeah, it's about 200 meters that way. uh, which again is what you're seeing on the map. In the first image you see the white beach with a line which shows you where it is now. That much of
Hi,
land is gone.
folks. Reading
Oops.
Marginlands.
Sorry. This goes. There we go. Yeah.
Yeah. So So yeah, very important to look at maps and other historical artifacts to understand where we're coming from. There's the map playing. And as Aarti said, just use Google Maps, use the Google Pro, use the history option, and you can explore landscapes over time. We did make the point that when it comes to environmental reporting, timelines are very, very important because what happens today has a past, it has a future. Moving on. Uh, so yeah, uh, we talked about adopting slow journalism techniques to capture things like erosion, etc. Uh, Again, I mean, to go back to the example that Aarti just used about the Thar, one way of looking at it is to, when you look at it from the individual through the collective to the global, look at it in reverse. Um, in Marginlands, there is the story of how the Indira Gandhi Canal, which was supposedly built at the cost of several thousand crore in order to bring water into the desert and to green the desert, as it's called, uh, actually ended up ruining a large part of the desert. Alongside that, there are the stories of wind energy and what that is doing to the local ecosystem, etc., etc. Uh, when you start telling that story, it's a dire story. It's like what's going on and what's the future? There is no future. But then when you pair it with the Chatar Singhs, with the communities that are drawing on ancient wisdom to prosper in one of the hardest places to make a living in. I remember, Aarti, there were people who said they did not feel the need to migrate because they were making a good living right there in the middle of the Thar, right?
Yeah, and
Through agriculture.
they had enough water, they had food because of the Kadins where they grew their
Yeah,
food. And they used to be beggars
yeah,
because there was nothing. And after this came, they became rupee millionaires. So
right.
yeah, I mean, it changed their lives. And even in other places, there were always people who were either fighting for a better tomorrow or looking to correct certain things in their own ways where it'll again become better. So there was that. There are of course several cases also where it was hard, much harder, and people don't have those outs, or they don't have a way to, or it's not agency, but it's just that the odds are stacked against them. But they're always trying. They're
Yeah.
always trying, and
And it's necessary to capture that part of it because otherwise it's just a gloom and doom story, and that's what we get a lot of. Sure, there is gloom and doom, but there is also these stories of people who are. And one of the things that I remember is, for instance, the whole thing of telling such stories. It has a practical benefit as well. You remember when we were in Kanyakumari, and a conversation came up about a small battle that the people they were fighting with, and you were telling them about having heard similar stories and knowing of how in the Sundarbans area in West Bengal, people had faced the
yeah,
same problem, found
yeah,
a solution, and you put the
yeah,
two of them in touch, right?
yeah.
Uh,
Exactly.
some,
It happened even in with Sonam Wangchuk, who went to the
yes,
Thar to
yeah,
see how they use the water. So
yeah,
yes, so there's a lot of that happening where you can, since you've seen things and there are similarities or at least some kind of camaraderie, you can foster that, and then people get that. And there's, I mean, some people are doing excellent work that way. Uh, Disha, for example, which is an organization based out of Calcutta working with fishermen.
mm,
And they have been also connecting fishermen across the country who are facing similar situations, and helping them fight for their rights. So yes, absolutely.
right. And the last part, of course, is multimedia integration. One of the things I remember in the early days of the internet, Mr. Ajit Balakrishnan, who founded Rediff, I remember asking him, look, I mean, how do I understand? And at that point, we hadn't even seen the internet when these first conversations were going on. And I remember asking him, how do I, as a journalist, see what the internet brings to the table? And I remember his response so well. He said, look, your storytelling mediums have been radio, which is sound, television, which is moving images, stills and moving images, print, which is still images and text. He said, now imagine a medium that can combine all three of these, can use sound where it's appropriate, can use visuals where it's appropriate, can use words where it's appropriate. That is exactly what the internet lets you do. So stop thinking in terms of just words or just images. Think in terms of, think of the story and then use whichever element complements a particular aspect of that story. So use sound where necessary. There was this thing that I remember, Arti, when we were walking in Manipur along with Paul. You remember that stretch? It was about a kilometer, kilometer and a half. And that memory is so vivid because there was this overarching uh, avenue of trees with literally millions of cicadas.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember at some point the noise that the cicadas make.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember at one point we stopped and looked at the decibel meter and found that it was the sound of a jet engine taking off. So we were literally,
Mm-hmm.
it's like standing next to a jet engine as it's
Mm-hmm.
preparing for takeoff. And then these cicadas have these emissions,
Mm-hmm.
this water-like thing that falls on
Mm-hmm.
you. And there were so many of them, and these things emit continuously that it was like a tropical shower.
Yeah,
And it there's no way you can describe that in a way that people can visualize it, but show it and it suddenly comes alive,
exactly. Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
So use multimedia. Uh, it's the greatest tool possible, particularly when you're doing environmental stories. So
Yeah.
moving on.
Hi, folks.
Yeah. Why do we want to tell these stories? Because of this. Uh, this is where we live, right? And it's, I don't know. I mean, how do we not tell stories is the point. The truth is that environmental stories are not just about crises. They can be about continuity. They can be about memory. They can be about resistance. They're about people who are trying to shape a future, even as the past is eroding, is dissolving around them. And the good news is you don't have to be a journalist to tell these stories. For example, if you walk the same stretch of road or the same trail over years and you've seen trees vanish along that path, you've got the beginnings of an environmental story right there. If you watched your neighborhood lake shrink season by season, you have a story. And Aarti and I'd love to hear them. We'd love it if you could write to us uh, at marginlands@gmail.com. We hope to feature some of these stories in upcoming episodes. Aarti?
Prem and I have been talking about, I mean, this was like, gosh, what, 1.5 hours of so much information, but truly, we've seen the power of a workshop and how it really, brings it to life when we're sitting across from you guys and or we're walking in field with you guys and we're all trying to figure the story out and then, from pitch to actual print or whatever, publishing the story. Uh, Taking somebody through that process, like Prem has taken, for example, me through it, it's invaluable. And later in the year, we're hoping to be able to do some of these workshops again, which we did, I think, with Paul Salopek and Out of Eden Walk 2018, and then once during the uh, during COVID, where Prem and I ran these workshops, the two of us, and we did it completely online, and it was great. But we might do some kind of a hybrid going forward. So keep a lookout for that, and then there'll be a sign up and an application, etc. And that will be wonderful, because God knows that we need people telling stories more meaningfully, more thoughtfully, more deeply, more in a more sustained way. Because I think one of the big things that's missing is that kind of sustained reporting or sustained storytelling. We have a lot of piecemeal things. We did that very first. If you go back to the very first episode of From the Marginlands, we did a kind of dipstick of how our mainstream media even tackles environmental or even addresses environmental stories. And oof, it's just so scattershot, right? But
Right.
sustained storytelling leads to what, Vishwanath said: if you don't identify the problems correctly, you will only have shallow or misplaced solutions. So a
Yeah.
shallow story leads to misplaced solutions. And we really need deep storytelling. There are so many things happening across our country which need, not just our country, everywhere, right? Even across in the world, but maybe even in your neighborhood, which may not ever make the news, but it's something that needs addressing. And we need those kinds of ground warriors, if you will, telling these kinds of stories.
Exactly. And a couple of points to add to what Arti was talking about. Now, what we did so far is walk you through the process that we follow when we're trying to tell a story, or Arti follows when she's in the field. Uh, Arti mentioned the workshops, what we want to do with those workshops. One of the things that you have to keep in mind is this is a what, 1 hour, 30 minutes, 1 hour, 40 minutes or so that we've recorded. You cannot convey everything about storytelling in an hour and 40 minutes. Aarti was mentioning the workshops that we did. That took 7 days of immersion. We used to start at 8 o'clock in the morning, and we used to wind up. I don't even remember when we wound up. There were days when we wound up well past midnight. I remember one particular night at 3 o'clock in the morning, Paul Salopik messaging me saying, "I just want to jump out of the window." Uh, I mean, he was desperate for sleep, and we were still reading submissions, etc. Uh, it takes that kind of time to understand the process of storytelling. That is one. The other point is, Arti talked about deep reporting, and a related aspect of that is wide reporting. Now, there are very good environmental journalists in India, uh, but they're a handful. The really good ones are a handful. They cannot be everywhere. They cannot get eyes on everything. And particularly when you consider that a story takes a long time to report and to mature, there is just so much that a handful of reporters can do. But imagine all of us pitching in, telling small local stories, and over time they all coalesce into larger stories. Somebody could tell a story about a vanishing neighborhood or a depleted neighborhood in Bangalore, which ties up with something that is happening in some other part of the country that somebody else is recording and telling. So we need lots and lots of people telling these stories, even small stories, right? So
Especially small stories, because that's
especially
what
small
makes up
stories. Yeah,
it's those are the things that build up,
yeah,
and really, I think my personal dream would be that environment does not become other. It becomes as natural as talking about politics, or
yeah,
as natural as talking about, because it really defines, and it's the underpinning, it's the bedrock of all life,
yeah.
right? And we need to keep an eye on what's happening to it, and to us in the process.
So hopefully we'll come back with information on when we will be doing these workshops, which like Aarti pointed out, we want to make it a hybrid. We want some level of online show and tell, yes, but we would also like you guys to come with us, explore environments with us, see with us, and tell stories with us. So all of that coming up shortly. In the meantime, thank you all for your uh, time, and we will leave you with a little something that hopefully inspires you to tell stories.
Take care and see you in episode 11. Bye for now.
Uh, a two-time Pulitzer, a multiple Pulitzer winner by the name of Tom Friends, in casual conversation once told me that this is the one book you need to read to take your storytelling to the next level. What it says in the prefatory remarks is, I'm quoting, here's what I would like you to do for me. Make me laugh, make me cry, show me my place in this world, show me the world's place in my life. Lift me out of my skin and put me inside in others and show me what it is like to live there. Show me the places that I have never been to. Carry me to the ends of time and space. Give my demons names, give my fears a face, and show me how to confront them. Present before me heroes who will give me courage and hope. Demonstrate for me possibilities I had never thought of. Ease my sorrows, increase my joy, teach me compassion, entertain me, enchant me, enlighten me, and above all, tell me a story. And for me, this is it.
This is
It's
it. It
right.
really is. It
So
really is. There's nothing there that is um, that and nothing more that you need to know, because if you look at every sentence fragment there, it tells you how to be in field and how
yeah,
to tell a story. It's just absolutely fantastic, and I think that's a great way to end this episode. And and we will in the show notes even link to and write this whole thing out for you guys, because it's absolutely fantastic. And I think that is the essence of telling a good story, environmental, economic, anything.
caveat about the show notes though, if possible, because the show notes I notice has a certain character count.
That's right.
But yeah, but we'll try.